I still remember the smell of the rain hitting the asphalt outside our two-bedroom apartment in Austin, the kind of heavy, humid Texas downpour that makes you just want to curl up inside and forget the rest of the world exists. At that point in my life, I thought I had everything completely figured out. I was 28, working 70 hours a week at a boutique marketing firm, pushing myself to the absolute brink of exhaustion because I believed I was building a future. I had a beautiful fiancée, Chloe, whom I had met during our junior year at UT. She was vibrant, the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 10 new best friends. We had been together for 6 years, engaged for 8 months, and our wedding was slated for the upcoming spring at a vineyard just outside Fredericksburg. Everything was moving precisely according to the blueprint I had mapped out in my head. Then there was Julian. Julian had been my best friend since the 3rd grade. We grew up on the same tree-lined suburban street, rode our bikes through the neighborhood until the streetlights came on, and shared everything from our first beers to our college heartbreaks. He was the brother I never had. So when Julian called me 3 months ago, sounding completely broken after his tech startup collapsed and his girlfriend of 4 years kicked him out of their place in Denver, there wasn't even a question in my mind.
I didn't even consult Chloe before telling him he could come stay with us. I packed up his life in the back of my truck, drove 10 hours to pick him up, and brought him right into our home. I set up our heavy navy blue sectional sofa with clean sheets, extra pillows, and told him to take all the time he needed to get back on his feet. For the first few weeks, it felt like a nostalgia trip. We would stay up late drinking local IPAs, talking about the stupid things we did in high school, while Chloe sat on the rug laughing along with us. It felt perfect. I felt like the ultimate provider and the ultimate friend, balancing a demanding career, a beautiful relationship, and helping my brother out of a dark place. But looking back now, with the clarity that only heartbreak can provide, the subtle shifts started almost immediately. I was just too blinded by loyalty to see them. Because of my promotion track at the firm, I was spending more and more nights chained to my desk, staring at spreadsheets and campaign pitches until my eyes bled. I would text Chloe around 7 p.m. saying I'd be stuck until midnight, and she would text back telling me she loved me, to order some takeout, and not to work too hard. I comforted myself with the thought that Julian was there to keep her company, so she wouldn't feel lonely in the apartment. Julian didn't have a job yet. He was supposedly sending out resumes during the day, but mostly he was just home. When I did make it back before midnight, I would find the two of them cooking dinner together or deep in conversation about a movie they had watched. Sometimes when I walked through the front door, there would be a sudden, brief pause in their laughter, a microscopic delay before they turned their faces toward me and welcomed me back into the room. I brushed it off as my own exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. I trusted them more than I trusted myself. The week everything crumbled began like any other. We were launching a massive regional campaign for a high-profile client, and my boss had made it clear that my partnership track depended entirely on this execution. I was running on cold brew, adrenaline, and about 4 hours of sleep a night. Chloe seemed unusually quiet that Monday morning, picking at her avocado toast while staring out the kitchen window. I kissed the top of her head, told her I was sorry I had been so distant lately, and promised her that once this week was over, I was taking her away for a 3-day weekend in the hill country, just for the two of us. She didn't look at me when she replied. She just squeezed my wrist and said, "Yeah, that sounds nice, Sean." Julian was still asleep in the living room, his tall frame tangled in the blankets on the couch. I grabbed my briefcase, took one last look at my life, and walked out into the humid morning air.
By Thursday, the pressure at work had reached a boiling point. But through sheer luck and a lot of frantic rewriting, our team managed to lock in the client's final approval by 8:30 p.m. It was a massive victory. The entire office erupted into cheers, and my boss clapped me on the back, telling me to go home and get some sleep because I had earned it. I felt an incredible wave of relief wash over me. The heavy rock that had been sitting in my chest for months dissolved. I couldn't wait to get home to Chloe, to hold her, and to tell her that all the sacrifices, all the late nights, had finally paid off. I didn't text her. I wanted it to be a surprise. I imagined walking in, catching them by surprise, and suggesting we all go down to our favorite local taco joint to celebrate with margaritas. I got into my car, the tires splashing through the puddles of a sudden summer storm that had just rolled through the city. The drive took about 20 minutes, and with every mile, I felt lighter. I parked my car in my usual spot in the complex garage, noticing that Julian's battered old sedan was parked 2 spaces down. Good, they were both home. When I stepped out of the elevator onto our floor, the hallway was completely silent. I walked up to door 314, my keycard already in my hand. I slid the key into the electronic lock, heard the familiar little beep, and softly turned the handle. The apartment was dark, save for a warm amber glow emanating from the hallway that led to our master bedroom. The television in the living room was off, and Julian's sheets were neatly folded at the edge of the couch, but he wasn't there. I kicked off my shoes by the door, trying to be quiet in case Chloe had gone to sleep early. But as I walked past the kitchen island, I noticed 2 empty wine glasses sitting on the counter, a bottle of expensive Pinot Noir that I had been saving for our anniversary, sitting open and nearly drained next to them. A strange, cold prickle of unease traveled up the back of my neck. It wasn't an explicit thought, just a sudden, instinctual shift in the atmosphere of the apartment. The air felt heavy, charged with something hidden. I walked down the short hallway toward our bedroom, my socks making absolutely no sound on the hardwood floor. As I got closer, I heard a sound that made my entire body freeze mid-stride. It was a low, muffled laugh, Chloe's laugh, but it wasn't the casual, friendly laugh she shared with friends. It was intimate. It was a sound I hadn't heard from her in months. And then I heard a man's voice whispering something back to her, followed by the distinct, unmistakable creak of our mattress. My heart didn't just beat faster. It felt like it stopped completely, slamming against my ribs like a trapped bird. The blood rushed to my ears with a deafening roar, a high-pitched ringing that swallowed the ambient sounds of the storm outside. I stood outside my own bedroom door, my hand hovering an inch away from the brass knob, entirely paralyzed by a terrifying, primal certainty of what was on the other side. My mind tried frantically to construct a lie, any lie, to protect myself from the reality. Maybe they were just talking. Maybe Julian was helping her move something. Maybe I was crazy. I took a breath that felt like inhaling shattered glass, gripped the handle, and pushed the door open. The door swung inward with an agonizingly smooth silence, cutting through the amber light of the bedroom. The world seemed to decelerate into a series of jagged, disconnected still frames. There, on the linen sheets I had bought with her just 3 months ago, were my fiancé and my best friend. They didn't notice me instantly. For 2 horrific seconds, I was a ghost in my own life, watching the rhythmic cadence of their betrayal play out under the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Then Julian's eyes flicked toward the doorway. The transformation on his face was instantaneous. The casual, relaxed expression hardened into sheer, unadulterated terror. He scrambled backwards so fast he nearly rolled off the far side of the mattress, pulling the dark gray duvet with him in a frantic, undignified panic.
Chloe spun around, her blonde hair whipped across her face, her eyes widening until the whites showed clearly in the dim light. She let out a sharp, choked gasp that sounded like she had been punched squarely in the solar plexus. Nobody spoke. The silence that filled the room was absolute, heavy with the weight of a life shattering into a million unfixable pieces. I stood perfectly still in the threshold, my hands hanging uselessly at my sides, my briefcase still clutched in my right fist. I felt entirely detached from my own physical body, as if I were hovering near the ceiling, looking down at a pathetic man who had worked himself to the bone just to provide an empty apartment for his betrayers. "Sean," Chloe finally whispered. Her voice was trembling, stripped of all its usual confidence. She reached out blindly for a discarded shirt on the floor, her movements clumsy and frantic. "It's not... Please, Sean, just let me explain." "Explain what, Chloe?" My voice didn't sound like mine. It was flat, devoid of any inflection, hollowed out by a sudden freezing numbness that had washed over my entire nervous system. I looked past her to Julian, who was now standing on the opposite side of the bed, hastily pulling on a pair of jeans. His hands were shaking so violently he could barely manage the button. He wouldn't look at me. The guy who had stood by my side through every major milestone of my existence, the guy I called my brother, couldn't even force his eyes to meet mine. "Look at me, Julian," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming dangerously quiet. He swallowed hard, his jaw clenching as he finally raised his head. His face was flushed, a mix of deep shame and defensive panic written all over his features. "Man, I'm sorry," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I swear to God we didn't mean for this to happen. Things got heavy and we were both feeling down and it just happened." "It just happened," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "For 3 months, I let you sleep on my couch. I paid for your groceries. I bought the beer you drank while you sat on my furniture and figured out how to ruin my life. Did that just happen too?" "Sean, please," Chloe begged, stepping around the bed toward me. She was crying now, thick tears smudging her mascara, running down her pale cheeks. She reached out to touch my arm, but the moment her fingertips made contact with my sleeve, a jolt of pure electric fury snapped me out of my paralysis. "Don't touch me," I roared. The sound vibrated through the small bedroom, rattling the framed prints on the wall. I yanked my arm back as if she were covered in venom. "Don't you dare touch me." She flinched, pulling her hands back to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "It was a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake," she wailed, her shoulders shaking. "I was lonely, Sean. You're never here. You're always at the office, always working, and I felt like I didn't even matter to you anymore."
Julian was just here. He was listening to me, and I lost my mind. "I love you, Sean. Please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling." The sheer audacity of her words felt like a physical blow. She was standing in the wreckage of our 6-year relationship, next to the man I had taken in out of charity, and she was trying to find a way to lay the blame at my feet because I was working to build the future she had demanded. The vineyard wedding, the down payment on the house in Westlake, the lifestyle she wanted. I was killing myself for those things, and her response was to open our bedroom door to my best friend. "Get out," I said, looking directly at Julian. "Sean, let's just talk about this tomorrow when everyone is calm," Julian said, taking a cautious step forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture. I dropped my briefcase. The heavy leather hit the hardwood floor with a loud, dull thud. I walked over to the closet, grabbed Julian's duffel bag, and began ripping his clothes off the hangers, throwing them wildly into the center of the room. I went to the dresser, pulled out his folded shirts, and dumped them onto the floor. "I want you out of this apartment in 5 minutes, Julian," I said, my chest heaving as the numbness finally gave way to a burning, white-hot rage. "If you are still in this building in 5 minutes, I will personally throw you off the balcony. I don't care about your stuff, I don't care where you go, and I don't care if you sleep on the street. Get the hell out of my sight before I lose whatever control I have left." Julian didn't argue. The terrifying certainty in my voice must have reached him, because he dropped to his knees, frantically stuffing his clothes into the bag, not bothering to fold anything. He grabbed his shoes, his laptop from the nightstand, and bolted down the hallway without looking back once. A moment later, the heavy front door of the apartment clicked shut, the sound echoing through the space like a gunshot. Then, it was just the two of us. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the bed, her knees pulled up to her chest, rocking slightly as she cried. The room still smelled of her perfume and the open bottle of wine from the kitchen. Every single object in the room, the custom headboard we had chosen together, the rug we had spent hours haggling over at a flea market, now felt contaminated, twisted into a mockery of the life I thought we were sharing. "Are you leaving with him?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice had suddenly become. The anger hadn't left, but it had crystallized into something cold, sharp, and permanent. No, Sean, of course not," she cried, looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. "I don't want Julian. It was nothing, I swear it was nothing. It's you I want to marry. Please, don't throw everything we have away over a moment of weakness." "A moment of weakness," I whispered, walking over to her jewelry dish on the dresser. I picked up the small velvet box that held her engagement ring, the ring she had taken off and left on the nightstand before getting into bed with him. I opened it, looking at the diamond that had cost me 3 months of salary and half a year of missed sleep. I tossed the box onto the mattress next to her. "The wedding is off, Chloe. We are done."
No, Sean, please. She stood up, reaching for me again, but I stepped back, out of her reach. You can't just end 6 years like this. You ended it, I said, walking out of the bedroom. I didn't look back at her as she screamed my name. I walked down the dark hallway, picked up my briefcase from the floor, grabbed my car keys from the kitchen counter, and walked out into the pouring rain. The rain outside had turned into a blinding torrential sheets that hammered against the windshield of my car as I sat in the dark parking lot of a 24-hour diner off I-35. I hadn't started the engine. I just sat there in the dark, the green glow of the dashboard clock casting a sickly light over my hands, which were still trembling violently against the steering wheel. It was 1:14 a.m. Just 5 hours ago, I was a successful professional with a bright future, a loving fiancé, and a tight-knit circle of trust. Now, I was a cliché, a guy sitting in a damp car, displaced from his own home, staring blankly at the neon sign of a diner while his mind played the same 2-second loop of film over and over again. The look on Julian's face.
The way Chloe had gasped, the sound of our bed. Every time I closed my eyes, the images burned clearer, searing themselves into the back of my eyelids like a photographic negative. I tried to think of someone to call. My parents lived in Dallas, but telling them felt like admitting a humiliating failure. And honestly, the thought of answering their shocked questions made me want to throw up. My other friends were mostly mutual friends with Julian, guys we had known since college, and the idea of forcing them to choose sides in a spectacular, explosive betrayal felt exhausting. I realized with a sudden and terrifying clarity how completely isolated I had become. In my pursuit of success and security, I had built a fortress with Chloe, and she had just handed the keys to the one person I thought would protect it with his life. I spent the rest of the night driving aimlessly through the empty, rain-slicked streets of downtown Austin, watching the blurred taillights of passing cars until the sky began to turn a pale, bruised shade of gray. By 7 a.m., the numbness had fully receded, replaced by a hollow, throbbing ache that settled deep into my bones. I knew I couldn't go to work. I texted my boss, telling him a family emergency had come up and that I needed a personal day, the first one I had taken in 3 years. He didn't question it. After the victory the night before, I had plenty of capital to spend. Instead of going to an office, I drove back to the apartment complex. My stomach churned as I pulled into the garage, half expecting to see Julian's car or Chloe's crossover waiting for me. Both spots were empty. I took the elevator up, my heart hammering against my ribs with a sickening familiarity as I walked down the hallway to door 314. When I slid my keycard in, the lock beeped green. I pushed the door open tentatively, feeling like an intruder in my own home. The apartment was dead silent. The air felt stagnant, smelling faintly of the open wine bottle that still sat on the kitchen counter next to the 2 empty glasses. I walked into the bedroom. The bed was unmade, the gray duvet clouded in a messy heap on the floor where Julian had dropped it. Chloe was gone. But she hadn't just left for work. She had packed. The closet doors stood wide open, hangers clattering loosely against each other in the draft from the AC. Her shoe racks were empty. Her vanity, usually cluttered with a dozen different bottles of perfume and makeup palettes, was wiped completely clean, save for a single piece of white paper resting in the center of the dark wood. I walked over and picked it up. Her handwriting was shaky, the loops of her cursive uncharacteristically jagged. Sean, I don't expect you to forgive me. I know what I did was monstrous, and I hate myself for it. I'm staying at my sister's place in San Antonio for now to give you space. I left the engagement ring on the nightstand. I am so sorry for the pain I've caused you.
Please don't hate me forever. I looked down at the nightstand. There it was, the small velvet box, sitting under the soft light of the lamp that was still turned on from the night before. I opened it. The diamond caught the morning light, sparkling with a mocking brilliance. A wave of profound, suffocating sorrow washed over me, crushing the anger that had kept me upright through the night. I collapsed onto the edge of the unmade bed, buried my face in my hands, and finally wept. I cried for the 6 years we had spent building a life, for the road trips we took, for the quiet Sunday mornings, and for the family I thought we were going to start. It was all gone, erased by a casual, selfish choice, made in the very room where we used to whisper about our future. The next 2 weeks were a blur of functional survival. I went to work, performed my duties with a robotic efficiency that alarmed my colleagues, and came home to an empty, echoey apartment. I bought a new bed. I couldn't stand the thought of sleeping on the mattress they had contaminated, so I paid a premium to have a new one delivered within 24 hours, throwing the old one into the dumpster behind the building with a savage satisfaction. I stopped answering my phone. Chloe called dozens of times, leaving long, sobbing voicemails begging me to just sit down with her for a coffee, just to talk.
Julian texted me once, a wall of text filled with self-pitying apologies about how much he valued our friendship and how he hoped one day I could find it in my heart to understand. I blocked both of their numbers. I didn't want explanations. Explanations were just justifications wrapped in prettier words, and nothing they could say would change the reality of what they had done. It was on a Tuesday evening, exactly 16 days after that fateful night, when the silence was broken. I was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, carefully wrapping the framed photos of Chloe and me in bubble wrap to store them away in the attic. The apartment buzzer rang. I ignored it at first, assuming it was a delivery person or a neighbor, but it rang again, a persistent, demanding tone that echoed through the quiet space. I walked over to the intercom, pressing the talk button. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice tight. "Sean, please open up. It's Julian." The sound of his voice hit me like a physical punch to the jaw. The cold, dormant rage that I had spent 2 weeks trying to suppress flared back to life instantly, hot and suffocating. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter until my knuckles turned white. "Go away, Julian," I said into the intercom, my voice dangerously steady. "You have absolutely nothing to say to me." "Sean, I'm downstairs in the lobby."
"I'm not here to fight, I swear to God," he pleaded, his voice muffled by the speaker, but carrying an undeniable note of desperation. "You need to hear this. It's about Chloe. It's not what you think. Please, just give me 5 minutes. If you want to punch me in the face afterward, I'll let you, but just let me up." I stood there, staring at the flashing light on the intercom panel. Every rational cell in my brain told me to walk away, to turn off the system, and leave him standing on the pavement. But beneath the anger, a dark, toxic curiosity flared. What could he possibly say? What lie had they cooked up to ease their own consciences? I slammed my hand down on the door release button, heard the distant click of the lobby door opening below, and walked over to the front door of my apartment, pulling it wide open as I waited for the elevator to bring my former best friend up to face me. The elevator doors slid open with a soft mechanical hiss, and Julian stepped into the hallway. He looked terrible. He had lost weight in just over 2 weeks, his face pale and shadowed by a thick, unkempt beard. He was wearing an old, wrinkled flannel shirt and wouldn't look me in the eye as he walked slowly toward my open door. He stopped 3 feet away, his arms hanging awkwardly at his sides, staring at the floor between us. I didn't invite him in. I stood squarely in the threshold, my frame blocking the entrance to the apartment. "Speak," I said.
"You have exactly 5 minutes before I call the cops and report an intruder." Julian swallowed, his Adam's apple moving nervously. He finally looked up, his eyes bloodshot and watery. "Sean, I know you hate me. You have every right to. I destroyed the best thing in my life, and that was my brotherhood with you. But you need to know the truth about Chloe. I'm not trying to excuse what I did, but she's been lying to you for a lot longer than 3 months." A cold weight dropped into the bottom of my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my grip tightening on the edge of the doorframe. Julian took a shaky breath. "After you threw me out, I didn't go to a hotel. I didn't have the money. I parked down the street and waited. About an hour after you left in the rain, Chloe came out with her bags. She called me, crying, telling me to pick her up. She didn't go to her sister's place in San Antonio, Sean. She came to the cheap motel I checked into off the highway. We stayed there for 3 days. I felt a sickening wave of revulsion wash over me, but I kept my face completely blank. Why are you telling me this, Julian? To brag? To rub it in my face that she chose you the second I walked out? No, listen to me, Julian said, his voice cracking with emotion. That's the thing. She didn't choose me. While we were in that motel room, her phone kept buzzing. It wasn't just you she was avoiding. It was a guy named Marcus. I didn't know who he was, but she was deleting texts from him right in front of me. When she went to the bathroom, I did something terrible. I looked at her phone. He paused, looking at me with a genuine, twisted sense of pity that made me want to rip his throat out. Sean, she's been seeing this Marcus guy since before I even moved onto your couch. He's a guy from her corporate office. It wasn't a sudden mistake because she was lonely while you worked late. She's been renting Airbnb properties on the weekends when she told you she was visiting her mom in Dallas. I found the confirmation emails in her inbox. She used me, Sean. She used me because I was there, because she wanted to feel something different, and because she knew if she got caught with me, she could blame it on a momentary lapse of judgment with an old friend. But she's been planning to leave you for months. She was just waiting until the wedding vendors were fully paid so she could split the deposits. The hallway seemed to tilt on its axis. The walls pressed in on me, the air turning thick and unbreathable. The sheer scope of the deception was dizzying. 6 years. 6 years of shared dreams, of planning a life, of believing I was loved by someone who was actually calculating the financial timing of her exit while sleeping with my childhood best friend and a stranger from her office. Julian reached out a hand, trying to touch my shoulder. Man, I am so sorry. I didn't know.
If I had known she was doing that to you, I swear to God I would have never touched her. I thought we were both just lonely and broken, but she's empty, Sean. I looked at his hand, then up into his pathetic, tear-stained face. You think this makes you look better, Julian? I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet carrying a terrifying intensity. You think because she was cheating on me with someone else too, that your betrayal is somehow lighter? Sean, You still sat in my home, I interrupted, stepping forward, forcing him to take a step back into the hallway. You still looked me in the eye every single morning, drank my coffee, took my help, and then climbed into my bed. You didn't care about my heart. You didn't care about our 20 years of history. You only care now because you realized you weren't her grand romance. You were just a convenient distraction. You're not a victim here, Julian. You're just a secondary casualty of the exact same selfishness you possess. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing slightly, but no words came out. The harsh reality of his own insignificance in Chloe's web of lies had clearly shattered whatever delusion of grandeur he had been holding on to. I began to close the door. Sean, please, he begged, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. Don't throw away 20 years. We can fix this eventually. I'm your brother. I looked at the boy I had grown up with, the man who knew every secret I had ever kept, and felt absolutely nothing but a vast, empty distance. I don't have a brother, I said. I slammed the door shut, the heavy click of the deadbolt echoing through the quiet apartment. I walked back into the living room and sat down among the cardboard boxes. I didn't cry this time. The sorrow was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity that felt remarkably like freedom. The life I had spent 6 years building was a fiction, a beautiful house built on quicksand. But as I looked around the empty room, at the bare walls and the packed boxes, I realized something vital. The blueprint hadn't failed. I had just been building the right future with the wrong people. I stood up, walked over to my laptop on the kitchen island, and opened my email. I drafted a short, professional message to my boss, requesting a permanent transfer to our firm's new branch office in Chicago. It was a fresh start, a completely clean slate in a city where nobody knew my name, nobody knew my story, and nobody could remind me of the ghosts I was leaving behind in the Texas rain. I hit send, shut the screen, and for the first time in months, I took a deep, unrestricted breath.